The gunshot echoed through the canyon just as Emma Kincaid stumbled into the dusty street of Tucson, Arizona Territory. Her torn blue calico dress barely clinging to her bleeding shoulders, her feet bare and cut from miles of desperate flight through the rocky desert terrain. She collapsed near the wooden steps of the general store, her vision blurring from dehydration and exhaustion. Through the haze, she could make out figures approaching, their boot steps heavy on the packed dirt. Fear surged through her veins. Had they followed her here? Would they drag her back to the nightmare she had just escaped? A shadow fell across her face, blocking the merciless afternoon sun. She tried to scramble backward, but her body refused to cooperate. A gentle hand touched her arm and a deep voice cut through her panic. "Easy now. Nobody is going to hurt you here." Emma forced her eyes to focus. The man kneeling beside her had sun-weathered skin, dark brown eyes that radiated genuine concern, and a strong jaw covered with several days of stubble. He wore a dusty black hat, leather chaps over worn denim, and a checkered shirt that had seen better days. A silver star was pinned to his chest. "Please," she whispered, her throat raw and dry. "They cannot find me. They will kill me." The man's expression hardened. He lifted her effortlessly into his arms and spoke to someone behind him. "Doc Reynolds, get your bag. Miss, can you tell me who is after you?" Emma tried to answer, but darkness pulled at the edges of her consciousness. The last thing she heard before passing out was that same steady voice saying, "You are safe here now." When Emma woke, she found herself lying on a soft bed in a small, clean room. Late afternoon light filtered through lace curtains, casting gentle patterns on the whitewashed walls. A woman in her 50s sat in a rocking chair by the window, mending what looked like a shirt. "Well, good to see those eyes open," the woman said warmly, setting aside her sewing. "Name is Martha Reynolds. My husband is the doctor who patched up those cuts on your feet and shoulders. You have been out for nearly a full day." Emma's hand instinctively went to her shoulder, finding it carefully bandaged. Someone had dressed her in a clean white nightgown that was far too large for her slender frame. "The man," Emma said hoarsely, "the one with the star." "That would be Kyle Harrison, our town marshal. He brought you straight here, said you were running from someone. He has been checking in every few hours to see if you had woken up." Martha poured water from a pitcher into a glass and helped Emma sit up to drink. "You do not have to talk about anything until you are ready, dear. But you are safe in Tucson. Kyle does not let trouble stand for long." Emma sipped the water gratefully, feeling it soothe her parched throat. The terror that had driven her across the desert was starting to recede, replaced by bone-deep weariness. "I need to speak with him. I need to explain." "I will send word. But first, you need to eat something. You are thin as a rail." Martha disappeared, returning shortly with a bowl of warm soup and fresh bread. As Emma ate, Martha kept up a gentle stream of conversation about the town, clearly trying to help her feel at ease. Tucson was growing, she explained, with new settlers arriving regularly now that the Apache conflicts had settled somewhat. The marshal had been in town for 3 years, and folks respected him for his fairness and courage. "He is not married, then?" Emma asked, then immediately felt her cheeks flush at how forward the question sounded. Martha's eyes twinkled. "No, he is not. Kyle came here after some trouble up in Colorado. Does not talk much about his past, but then, lots of folks out here are running from something or starting fresh. He is a good man, though. You could not ask for a better protector." A knock at the door interrupted them. Martha answered it, and Kyle Harrison stepped into the room, hat in hand. He looked even taller than Emma remembered, probably around 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular build that spoke of hard work and harder living. He had cleaned up since yesterday. his face freshly shaven, revealing a strong, handsome face marked by a small scar on his left cheekbone. "Miss Kincaid," he said, his voice that same steady rumble she remembered from the street. "Good to see you awake. How are you feeling?" "Better, thanks to your kindness, Marshal Harrison." Emma set down her bowl and tried to straighten her borrowed nightgown self-consciously. "I owe you an explanation." Kyle pulled up a wooden chair and sat down, his brown eyes focused intently on her face. "Only if you are ready to give one. But if someone is hunting you, I need to know what we might be facing." Emma took a deep breath and began her story. She had been living in Phoenix with her uncle, Gerald Murdoch, after her parents died 2 years ago in a cholera outbreak. Her uncle ran a successful freight business, but he had accumulated significant gambling debts. When a ruthless businessman named Victor Kane offered to forgive those debts in exchange for Emma's hand in marriage, her uncle had agreed without consulting her. "Victor Kane," Kyle interrupted, his expression darkening. "I know that name. He has connections to some rough characters, runs freight contracts between here and California. Word is he is not particular about how he conducts business." Emma nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "I did not want to marry him. He is a cruel man, Marshal. I saw him beat one of his workers nearly to death for spilling a crate of goods. When I refused the arrangement, my uncle locked me in my room and said I would be married within the week whether I agreed or not. So I escaped through the window 3 nights ago and ran." "From Phoenix to Tucson on foot?" Kyle asked, his voice filled with a mixture of admiration and concern. "That is over 100 miles across some of the most unforgiving desert in the territory." "I managed to steal a horse," Emma admitted, "but it went lame about 20 miles back. I had no choice but to continue on foot. I could hear riders behind me yesterday morning, so I just kept running. I do not even remember the last part of the journey clearly. Everything was a blur of heat and fear." Kyle was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight. When he spoke, his voice was firm and reassuring. "Miss Kincaid, you are under my protection now. If Victor Kane or your uncle show up in Tucson looking for you, they will have to go through me, and I do not intend to let that happen." The conviction in his words made Emma's eyes sting with grateful tears. She had been alone and frightened for so long, and here was this stranger offering protection without asking for anything in return. "Why are you helping me, Marshal? You do not know me." Kyle's expression softened, and for a moment, Emma saw something vulnerable flash across his face. "Because I know what it is like to feel trapped, to have people with power try to control your life, and because it is the right thing to do. Simple as that." Over the following days, Emma slowly recovered her strength. Martha and her husband, Doc Reynolds, insisted she stay with them until she was fully healed. The town folk were welcoming but curious, though Kyle made it clear that Emma's business was her own and anyone who bothered her would answer to him. Emma found herself looking forward to Kyle's daily visits. He would stop by in the morning on his rounds and again in the evening after his patrol. At first, their conversations were practical, discussing her recovery and his plans for keeping her safe. But gradually, they began to talk about other things. Kyle told her about growing up in Kansas, learning to handle cattle and horses on his family's ranch. He spoke about losing his father to a range war and his mother to grief shortly after. "That is when I left Kansas," he said one evening as they sat on the Reynolds porch watching the sun paint the desert mountains in shades of orange and purple. "I drifted for a while, worked as a ranch hand, tried my luck in the mines. Eventually ended up as a deputy in Colorado. That did not end well, but it taught me what kind of man I wanted to be." "What happened in Colorado?" Emma asked gently. Kyle was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, I fell in love with the wrong woman. She was married to a wealthy rancher, unhappy, or so she said. We planned to run away together. But when the time came, she chose her comfortable life over freedom with me. Her husband found out about us anyway. He tried to have me killed, and when that did not work, he used his influence to ruin my reputation. I had to leave Colorado or end up dead in an alley somewhere. I am sorry, Emma said softly. That must have been terribly painful. It was. But it brought me here, and I like to think I am doing good work in Tucson. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us exactly where we need to be. He turned to look at her, and Emma felt her breath catch at the intensity in his eyes. Do you believe in that? In things happening for a reason? I do not know, Emma admitted. A month ago, I would have said my life was nothing but bad luck and poor choices made by others. But now, sitting here, I wonder if perhaps you are right. The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken words. Kyle reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of her auburn hair behind her ear. His fingers were calloused but gentle, and the touch sent warmth spreading through Emma's chest. Emma, he said, using her first name for the first time. I want you to know that you can stay in Tucson as long as you need. I will make sure you are protected, help you find work, whatever you need. No strings attached, but I also need to be honest with you about something. What is it? Emma's heart was racing. I care about you. More than I should, given that we have only known each other a week. I do not want you to feel obligated to me because I helped you. That is not why I did it. But I would be lying if I said I did not hope that maybe, once you are settled and safe, you might consider letting me court you properly. Emma felt a smile spread across her face, the first genuine smile she could remember in months. Kyle, I would like that very much. You have been nothing but kind and honorable. I care about you too. The relief on Kyle's face was almost comical. He let out a breath he had been holding and returned her smile with one of his own that transformed his usually serious face into something almost boyish. Well then, that is good news. Very good news indeed. Their moment was interrupted by the sound of horses thundering into town. Kyle was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. From their vantage point on the porch, they could see 6 riders pulling up in front of the marshal's office, dust swirling around their horses. Stay here, Kyle commanded, his voice all business. He strode down the steps and into the street. Emma's blood ran cold as she recognized the man leading the group. Victor Kane sat astride a large bay horse, his expensive suit somehow still crisp despite the desert journey. He was in his early 40s, with slicked-back dark hair, a well-trimmed mustache, and cold gray eyes that missed nothing. Next to him sat her Uncle Gerald, looking uncomfortable and refusing to meet Emma's gaze even from across the street. "Marshal Harrison," Victor called out, his voice smooth and cultured. "I am looking for my fiancée. I have reason to believe she passed through Tucson recently. Young woman, auburn hair, about 20 years old, would have been in some distress." Kyle crossed his arms over his chest, his stance radiating controlled power. "And why exactly would you be looking for a woman in distress, Mr. Kane?" Victor's smile did not reach his eyes. "So you do know where she is? Excellent. Emma Kincaid is my betrothed, Marshal." She ran away from her uncle's home in Phoenix, clearly confused and unwell. "We have been very worried about her. I am here to take her home where she belongs." "That is not going to happen," Kyle said flatly. The tension in the street ratcheted up several notches. Victor's men shifted in their saddles, hands moving closer to their weapons. Emma noticed several townspeople ducking into buildings, sensing trouble. "I beg your pardon," Victor's voice turned icy. "I do not think you understand the situation, Marshal. Emma is promised to me. Her legal guardian has given his consent. I have every right to take her back to Phoenix." "She is an adult woman who does not want to marry you," Kyle replied, his voice calm but implacable. "That is all the situation I need to understand. Emma has sought refuge here, and I am granting it. You and your men need to turn around and ride back to Phoenix." Gerald finally spoke up, his voice weak. "Emma, please, be reasonable. Mr. Kane has been very generous. This arrangement benefits everyone." Emma stood up and walked to the porch railing, her hands gripping the wood tightly. "Everyone except me, Uncle. I told you I did not want this marriage. You sold me like a piece of property to pay your debts." "Now, Emma, that is not fair," Gerald protested. "I am thinking of your future. What else are you going to do? You have no money, no prospects. Mr. Kane can provide for you." "I would rather make my own way than be shackled to a man I do not love," Emma said firmly, surprised by the strength in her own voice. Victor's expression hardened. "This is touching, truly. But I did not ride all this way to be turned away by some small town marshal with delusions of authority." He turned his attention back to Kyle. "I have friends in the territorial government, Marshal Harrison. I can make your life very difficult if you insist on interfering in my personal affairs." "You are welcome to try," Kyle said. "But while you are making plans, you and your men are going to get back on those horses and leave. Emma stays here of her own free will, and there is not a legal leg you have to stand on to force her otherwise." For a long moment, the street was silent except for the sound of a dry wind rustling through the sagebrush. Emma could see the calculation in Victor's eyes, weighing his options. Then one of his men, a scarred brute with a tied-down gun, spoke up. "Maybe we just take her, boss. This lawman cannot stop all of us." Kyle's hand hovered near his revolver. "I would advise against that course of action. You might get me, but several of you would be dead before that happens. And if you somehow manage to take Emma by force, every lawman in the territory would be hunting you for kidnapping. Is she really worth all that trouble, Kane?" The calculation in Victor's eyes shifted. He was a businessman first, and Kyle's argument made cold, logical sense. Violence would bring attention he did not want and legal complications that could threaten his various enterprises. "This is not over, Marshal," Victor said finally. "Emma, you are making a terrible mistake. When you come to your senses and realize what you have given up, do not expect me to take you back." "I will take that risk," Emma said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Victor yanked his horse's reins with more force than necessary, turning the animal roughly. "Let us go. This backwater town is not worth our time." He looked at Gerald. "Your debts are your own problem now, Murdoch. Our arrangement is void." Gerald's face went pale. "But Mr. Kane, you promised—" "I promised nothing. You failed to deliver on your end of our bargain. Good luck with your creditors." With that, Victor spurred his horse into motion, his men following behind in a cloud of dust. Gerald sat for a moment longer, looking up at Emma with an expression mixing resentment and desperation. "I hope you are happy, Emma. You have ruined me." "You ruined yourself with your gambling and poor choices, Uncle," Emma said, feeling a mixture of anger and pity. "I am sorry for your troubles, but I will not sacrifice my life to fix them." Gerald said nothing more, just turned his horse and rode after Victor Kane's group, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As the riders disappeared into the distance, Kyle turned back to the porch. "Well, that could have gone worse, but I do not think we have seen the last of Victor Kane. Men like him do not like losing, especially not in front of others." Martha Reynolds came out onto the porch, having watched the entire confrontation from inside. "That was very brave of you both. But Kyle is right, Emma. You need to be careful. Men like Kane have long memories and longer reaches." "I will keep close watch," Kyle promised. "Emma, I think it would be best if you stayed in town proper for now, where there are always people around. And I want you to learn to handle a firearm just in case." Over the following weeks, Emma settled into life in Tucson. Martha helped her acquire proper clothing, and Kyle arranged for her to take a position helping at the schoolhouse, assisting the teacher, Mrs. Abigail Foster, with the younger children. Emma found she enjoyed the work, and the children took to her immediately with her patient nature and gentle humor. Kyle made good on his promise to teach her to shoot. They would ride out in the early evening to a small canyon outside of town, where Kyle set up targets and patiently instructed her on handling a revolver. Emma proved to be a quick learner, her hands steady and her eyes sharp. "You are a natural," Kyle said one evening after she successfully hit 3 bottles in a row. "Better than most men I've trained." Emma lowered the gun, smiling. "I had a good teacher and strong motivation to learn." They were standing close together, the setting sun painting everything in golden light. Kyle reached out and took the revolver from her hand, carefully engaging the safety before setting it aside. Then he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "Emma Kincaid, you are the bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever met. You faced down danger with grace, started a new life with courage, and you somehow see something worthwhile in a broken-down lawman like me." "You are not broken down," Emma whispered, placing her hands over his. "You are honorable and kind and everything I never knew I wanted." Kyle kissed her then, soft and careful at first, then with growing passion as Emma responded, her arms sliding around his neck. The kiss felt like coming home, like finding something she had not known was missing. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you," Kyle said simply. "I know it is fast, but I have never been more sure of anything." "I love you too," Emma replied, tears of happiness sliding down her cheeks. "I did not think I could feel this way, especially not after everything that happened. But you make me feel safe and cherished and free all at once." They stood together as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, making quiet plans for their future. Kyle wanted to court her properly, he said, do things right. Emma agreed, though she already knew how the courtship would end. She had found her home, and it was not a place but a person. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness. Kyle courted Emma with an old-fashioned formality that charmed her, bringing her flowers from the desert, taking her on picnics, and sitting with her on the porch in the evenings talking about everything and nothing. The town folk quickly accepted them as a couple, and there was already talk of a wedding in the spring. But happiness in the Arizona territory was never guaranteed for long. One cold November morning, a drifter rode into Tucson with disturbing news. Victor Kane had been asking questions in Phoenix and other towns, hiring men, rough types who would do anything for money. Word was he was still obsessed with Emma, seeing her refusal as a personal insult that needed avenging. Kyle took the news seriously, doubling his patrols and asking the townspeople to report any strangers immediately. He also insisted Emma stay with him in the small house behind the marshal's office, where he could better protect her. The arrangement raised a few eyebrows, but Martha Reynolds vouched for the propriety of the situation, noting that Emma slept in the bedroom while Kyle took the small cot in the front room. "I do not like you being in danger because of me," Emma said one evening as Kyle checked the locks on the doors and windows for the third time. "You are not putting me in danger. Victor Kane is choosing to make trouble, and that is on him, not you." Kyle sat down next to her at the small kitchen table, taking her hands in his. "Emma, I have been thinking. I know we plan to wait until spring for a wedding, but given everything happening, maybe we should move up our plans." Emma's heart skipped. "Are you asking me to marry you, Kyle Harrison?" Kyle smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. I suppose I am, though I am making a hash of it. I do not have a ring yet, and this is hardly romantic. But yes, Emma Kincaid, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life protecting you, loving you, building a future with you? Yes, Emma said without hesitation. Yes, absolutely yes. They were married 3 days later in the small church on the edge of town, with Doc and Martha Reynolds standing as witnesses, and most of Tucson in attendance. Emma wore a simple white dress that Martha and some of the other town ladies had hastily stitched together, and Kyle wore his best suit, his hair carefully combed and his face freshly shaved. The Reverend kept the ceremony short and sweet, and when he pronounced them man and wife, Kyle kissed Emma with such tender devotion that several of the watching ladies dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The town threw them a celebration at the saloon, which had been scrubbed clean and decorated for the occasion. There was music and dancing, good food, and plenty of well wishes. For one perfect evening, Emma forgot about Victor Kane and her uncle's betrayal, lost in the joy of being married to the man she loved. That night, in the small house behind the marshal's office, Kyle carried Emma over the threshold and set her down gently in the bedroom. They made love slowly, carefully, Kyle treating her like something precious and breakable even as Emma urged him on with growing confidence and desire. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Emma's head resting on Kyle's chest as his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I never thought I could be this happy," Emma murmured. "A few months ago I was running through the desert, certain I would die alone out there. Now I am here with you, safe and loved. It seems impossible." "You fought for this happiness," Kyle said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You were brave enough to run, strong enough to survive, and wise enough to build a new life. I am just lucky you decided to include me in it. We are going to have a good life together," Emma said with certainty. "I can feel it." Winter settled over Tucson, bringing cooler temperatures and the occasional rain that turned the desert briefly green. Emma continued her work at the schoolhouse, and Kyle maintained his patrols, keeping watch for any sign of trouble. They fell into comfortable routines, sharing meals, talking about their days, making love, and making plans for the future. In early February, Emma realized she was pregnant. She told Kyle over breakfast, watching nervously for his reaction. He set down his coffee cup carefully, his face cycling through shock, joy, and concern in rapid succession. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Emma asked. Kyle was around the table in an instant, pulling her into his arms. "Happy?" "Emma, I am terrified and thrilled and more grateful than I can put into words. Yes, I am happy. So incredibly happy." They shared the news with close friends who celebrated with them. Martha Reynolds immediately began knitting baby clothes, and the schoolchildren were excited at the prospect of their teachers' helper having a baby they could eventually meet. But the joy was shadowed by continued worry about Victor Kane. There had been no direct threats, but the reports of him hiring men had not stopped. Kyle grew increasingly protective, insisting Emma limit her movements to the most populated parts of town. The confrontation came on a warm March evening. Kyle was doing his evening patrol when one of his deputies, a young man named Samuel Wright, came running to find him. "Marshal, there are men at the north edge of town. Looks like they are setting up to cause trouble. 8 or 9 of them, all armed." Kyle's jaw tightened. He had been expecting this. "Get Emma from the house and take her to the church. Tell Reverend Matthews to lock the doors and not open them for anyone but me. Then round up any men in town willing to help. We are going to settle this tonight." As Samuel ran to follow orders, Kyle checked his weapons and walked deliberately toward the north end of town. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and orange that reminded him uncomfortably of blood and fire. He found the men exactly where Samuel had reported, gathered near the last building on the street. And at their center, looking far less polished than the last time Kyle had seen him, was Victor Kane. "Marshal Harrison," Victor called out, his voice carrying a slight slur that suggested he had been drinking. "We need to talk about my wife." "You do not have a wife," Kyle said calmly, stopping about 20 feet away from the group. "Emma is my wife, legally married." "You need to let this go, Kane, before someone gets hurt." Victor laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "Your wife, that is rich. She was mine first, promised to me. You stole her." "Emma was never yours. She is not property to be stolen. She is a woman who made her own choice about who to marry, and she chose me. Now take your men and ride out while you still can." "I do not think so." Victor gestured, and his men began to spread out, forming a loose semicircle. "I paid good money for those debts, made promises based on that woman becoming my wife. I have been made to look like a fool. That has consequences." Kyle could see how this was going to play out. He was outnumbered, but he had faced worse odds. The key was to stay calm, look for openings, and hope that the men Kane had hired were not actually willing to die for his wounded pride. "Last chance, Kane. Ride away. There is nothing for you here but trouble." "The only one in trouble is you, Marshal." Victor went for his gun. He was slow, unpracticed, and Kyle could have shot him easily. But he held his fire, hoping to avoid bloodshed if possible. That moment of mercy almost cost him everything. 2 of Kane's men drew and fired. Kyle felt a bullet tear through his left shoulder, spinning him partially around. He returned fire by instinct, his shot catching one of the gunmen in the chest. The man went down hard. Then the street erupted in gunfire. But Kyle was not alone. Several townsmen had positioned themselves on rooftops and in doorways, responding to Samuel's call for help. The fight was brief but intense. When the smoke cleared, 3 of Kane's men were dead, 2 were wounded, and the rest had thrown down their weapons and were raising their hands in surrender. Victor Kane was on his knees in the dust, clutching a wounded arm and screaming obscenities. Kyle walked toward him, his own wound bleeding freely but adrenaline keeping him upright. "It is over, Kane. You are done." "This is not over," Victor spat. "I have lawyers, connections. I will destroy you." "No, you will not." Kyle nodded to Samuel, who had emerged from cover unharmed. "Lock him up. Charges are attempted murder, assault with deadly weapons, and disturbing the peace. Round up the survivors and get them secured too." Only then did Kyle allow himself to acknowledge the pain radiating from his shoulder. He pressed his hand against the wound, feeling the warm slick of blood. Doc Reynolds was already running toward him, medical bag in hand. "Sit down before you fall down, you stubborn fool," Doc commanded. "That needs stitching immediately." Emma appeared at Kyle's side as if from nowhere, her face pale but composed. "I told you to stay in the church," Kyle said weakly. "And I ignored you because I am your wife, not your prisoner," Emma replied, helping support him as Doc examined the wound. "How bad is it?" "Clean through and through, miss the bone," Doc said. "Painful and needs cleaning, but he will be fine if we prevent infection. Let us get him back to my office." The following weeks were busy with legal proceedings. Victor Kane and his surviving men were tried and convicted. Kane received 5 years in the territorial prison for his crimes. His business empire, already shaky, collapsed entirely without his management. Emma's uncle Gerald apparently fled the territory to escape his creditors, and no one in Tucson much cared where he had gone. Kyle's shoulder healed slowly, the injury more serious than Doc Reynolds had initially thought. For a while, Emma feared he might lose the use of his arm, but Kyle worked through the pain with stubborn determination, doing the exercises Doc prescribed until gradually the strength returned. Emma's pregnancy progressed smoothly. As her belly swelled with their growing child, Kyle became even more protective and doting. He would rest his hand on her stomach at night, marveling at the movements he could feel. "What do you want?" he asked one evening. "A boy or a girl?" "Healthy," Emma said immediately. "That is all that matters, though I think a boy would be nice. A son who grows up to be as good a man as his father." "I hope he is smarter than me," Kyle said, "and that he gets your courage." Their son was born on a hot August day in 1883, after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. Kyle paced outside the bedroom where Doc Reynolds and Martha were helping Emma, nearly wearing a hole in the floor. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, he practically crashed through the door. Emma lay exhausted but radiant in the bed, holding a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Meet your son," she said softly. Kyle approached almost reverently, looking down at the tiny, red-faced infant. His son had a shock of dark hair and was wailing with impressive volume. "He has good lungs," Kyle said, his voice thick with emotion. "They named him James," Emma said as Kyle carefully took the baby in his arms. "After your father." Kyle looked up at her, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Thank you for him, for you, for this life. I love you so much, Emma." "I love you too. Now sit down before you drop our son." James Harrison proved to be a healthy, happy baby who rarely cried and loved being held. Kyle was a devoted father, helping with feedings and diaper changes without complaint, walking the floor with James when he was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice that always seemed to soothe the infant. Emma took a break from the schoolhouse to focus on motherhood, though she missed the work. Kyle promised that when James was older, she could return if she wanted, or perhaps they could discuss opening a small school of her own. They had been saving money, and Kyle had ideas about expanding into ranching, perhaps buying some land outside of town. Life settled into a new normal. Kyle continued his work as marshal, keeping Tucson safe and orderly. Emma devoted herself to raising James while also helping with various charitable works in town. They made friends, built a life, and slowly allowed themselves to believe that the danger had truly passed. 2 years after James was born, Emma gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. She was a quiet, thoughtful baby with Emma's auburn hair and Kyle's brown eyes. James, now a toddling 2-year-old, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything, though his help often created more work than it solved. "We have been blessed," Kyle said one evening as they sat on the porch of their new house, a larger place they had built on the edge of town. James was playing in the yard with a wooden horse Kyle had carved, and baby Grace was sleeping in Emma's arms. "I never imagined my life could be like this." "Neither did I," Emma agreed. "When I think about that day I stumbled into Tucson, terrified and alone, and then you told me I was safe here. You gave me more than safety, Kyle. You gave me a home, a family, a future. You gave me everything." Kyle leaned over and kissed her softly. "You gave me just as much. More, maybe. Before you, I was just going through the motions, doing my job, but not really living. You reminded me what it meant to hope, to love, to build something that matters." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the desert in brilliant colors. James came running up to the porch, demanding that his father come see how his horse could jump over a rock. Kyle stood with a groan that was mostly theatrical and followed his son into the yard, making appropriately impressed sounds at the jumping horse. Emma watched them with a full heart. Her life had not turned out anything like she had once imagined, but it had turned out better. She had escaped a terrible fate, found love in an unexpected place, and built a family filled with joy and laughter. 3 more children followed in the years to come. 2 more sons named William and Henry, and another daughter named Rose. The Harrison house was always full of noise and activity, with children running in and out, friends visiting, and neighbors stopping by. Kyle eventually retired from being marshal at age 45, after 20 years of service to Tucson. The town threw him a celebration, and the new marshal, a capable young man Kyle had personally trained, promised to uphold the standards Kyle had set. By then, Kyle and Emma had purchased a small ranch outside of town where they raised cattle and horses. Emma did eventually open her school, a small but well-regarded institution where she taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to children from Tucson and the surrounding ranches. She was known as a firm but fair teacher who genuinely cared about her students' success. As the years passed and their children grew, married, and started families of their own, Kyle and Emma would often sit together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the desert sunset just as they had done so many times before. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had married Victor Kane?" Kyle asked one evening when they were both in their 60s. Emma shuddered dramatically. "I try not to. That man ended up dying in prison, I heard. Pneumonia. I cannot say I mourned his passing. But thinking about that alternative life, trapped in a loveless marriage, never knowing you or having our children, it would have been a living death. I think about the timing sometimes," Kyle mused. "If you had arrived in Tucson a day later, or if I had been out on patrol when you stumbled into town, how different everything could have been." "But it did not happen differently," Emma said, taking his weathered hand in hers. "I arrived exactly when I needed to, and you were there exactly when I needed you. That is what matters." Their oldest, James, took over the ranch when Kyle's health began to decline in his late 60s. By then, they had 12 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. Family gatherings were loud, chaotic affairs that left both Kyle and Emma exhausted, but happy. One spring evening, when Kyle was 72 and Emma 70, they sat on their porch watching yet another sunset. Kyle's health had been failing for months, his heart growing weaker despite Doc Reynolds' best efforts. They both knew the end was approaching, though neither spoke of it directly. "I want you to know," Kyle said quietly, "that you made my life worth living, Emma. Every single day with you has been a gift I never deserved, but will always be grateful for." "You deserved every happiness," Emma replied, tears sliding down her lined cheeks. "You were the best man I ever knew, Kyle Harrison. You saved my life that day in Tucson, and then you spent the rest of yours making sure I never regretted being saved." "I love you," Kyle whispered. "Then, now, and always." "I love you too," Emma said. "Forever." Kyle passed away peacefully in his sleep that night, Emma holding his hand. She mourned him deeply, but without regret. They had lived a full, rich life together, filled with love and laughter, challenges overcome and joys celebrated. Emma lived another 8 years after Kyle's death, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, teaching at her school until her health no longer permitted it, and keeping Kyle's memory alive through the stories she told. She was beloved in Tucson, known as the woman who had arrived with nothing but a torn dress, and built a legacy of love and family that would endure for generations. When Emma died at age 78, surrounded by her family, her last words were about the day she had stumbled into Tucson terrified and alone, and the cowboy marshal who had promised her safety and given her so much more. They were buried side by side in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Tucson, their matching headstones bearing simple inscriptions. Kyle's read, "A good man, a faithful husband, a loving father. Emma's read. She arrived with nothing and left a legacy of love. Their children and grandchildren continued to live in and around Tucson, carrying forward the values Kyle and Emma had instilled in them. Courage in the face of adversity, kindness toward those in need, and the understanding that love, when genuine and freely given, could overcome any obstacle. The house they had built on the ranch remained in the family for generations, each new occupant adding to its history while honoring its past. The old porch where Kyle and Emma had spent so many evenings remained, and it was said that sometimes, in the quiet moments at sunset, you could almost feel their presence there still. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that would endure long after they were gone. In town, a small plaque was eventually placed on the spot where Emma had collapsed that day in 1882 with an inscription that read, "On this spot, Emma Kincaid arrived seeking safety. Here she found love, built a family, and created a legacy. May we all be so blessed in our darkest hours." The story of the woman with nothing but a torn dress and the cowboy marshal who saved her became part of Tucson's folklore, told and retold through the years. But for those who had known them, Kyle and Emma were more than a story. They were proof that even in the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the Arizona Territory, kindness could flourish, love could triumph, and two broken souls could find healing in each other's arms. Their grandson, named Kyle after his grandfather, eventually wrote down the family history in a leather-bound journal that was passed down through the generations. In it, he described his grandmother's arrival in Tucson, his grandfather's immediate protection of her, and the love that blossomed between them. They were not perfect people, he wrote in the journal's introduction. They faced hardships, made mistakes, and struggled like everyone does. But they loved each other with a fierce, unwavering devotion that never dimmed, even in their final days. That love was the foundation of our family, and it remains our greatest inheritance. The journal contained stories of Kyle's bravery as marshal, of Emma's dedication to education and her students, of the children they raised, and the life they built together. It spoke of hard winters and dry summers, of cattle drives and school recitals, of quiet evenings on the porch and loud family dinners around a crowded table. It also contained Emma's own account of that desperate flight across the desert, written years later at her children's request. She described the fear that had driven her, the physical suffering of the journey, and the overwhelming relief when she saw the buildings of Tucson rising from the desert haze. "I thought I would die out there," she wrote. "I had accepted it even. But something kept me moving forward, one painful step after another. Perhaps it was stubbornness, or perhaps it was fate, because that journey led me to Kyle. Everything I endured was worth it for the life we built together. If I had to make the choice again, knowing everything that would happen, I would still run. I would still stumble into that dusty street, because it brought me home." Kyle's account was briefer, written in his characteristically straightforward style, but his love for Emma shone through every word. "I saw her fall in the street and knew my life was about to change," he wrote. "She was the bravest person I had ever met, and I loved her from almost the first moment. Protecting her, loving her, building a life with her was the greatest honor of my existence. If I did any good in this world, it was because she made me want to be a better man." The leather journal became a treasured family heirloom, read by each new generation, a tangible link to the couple whose love had started it all. And through it, Kyle and Emma's story lived on, inspiring their descendants to face their own challenges with courage, to love fiercely and faithfully. and to remember that sometimes the darkest moments in our lives are simply the prelude to our greatest joys. In the end, Emma had been right that day on the porch when she said they would have a good life together. They had built more than a good life. They had built a legacy of love that would echo through the generations, a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and the simple act of offering safety to someone in desperate need. The Arizona desert sun continued to rise and set over Tucson, painting the sky in brilliant colors, just as it had on that long-ago day when a terrified young woman collapsed in the street and a cowboy marshal promised her safety. The town grew and changed, but the story remained, a reminder that sometimes salvation comes when we least expect it, in the form of a stranger who becomes the love of our life, and that the best things we can build are not houses or fortunes, but families filled with love and memories that endure long after we are gone.